Hope everybody's holiday season out there in Big Ten country went great, but now it's time to dive in to those Christmas leftovers and react to a trio, the first three Big Ten bowl games on the bowl calendar. USC and Nebraska finished off maybe disappointing 6-6 seasons with bowl victories. Let's react and recap to the Rate Bowl, the Las Vegas Bowl, and the Pinstripe Bowl.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
The Big Ten Conference wasted no time in getting their bowl season started after Christmas, and it went down in the desert with the Rate Bowl between the Rutgers Scarlet Knights and the Kansas State Wildcats. Of course, Rutgers, a 7-5 season in the regular year. A really solid year once again for Greg Schiano and his club from New Jersey. Chris Kleiman and the Kansas State Wildcats, they have established a line of consistency coming out of the Big 12. So this was going to be a challenge in the Rate Bowl in Arizona for Greg Schiano and the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And look, we didn't even see this game start until it was 17-17. That's when things flipped over to this Rutgers and Kansas State game on ESPN, because remember, there was that great 6 overtime game between Pitt and Toledo that preceded this game. Look, isn't bowl season great? I love this time of year. I love these bowl games and the opportunity it provides for these players and us fans certainly alike. But I think what we missed during that ESPN overlap, and well, what we also didn't miss when the game eventually kicked over, was this was a Rutgers offense that started on fire early. This was a Rutgers offense that was humming. This was one of the best Rutgers offensive performances of 2024. When you think of Rutgers, you don't necessarily think of a team that's going to put up 40 points every single game. And they put up 41 in this game against the Big 12's Kansas State Wildcats. They punted on their first drive of the game, but then they rattled off 6 consecutive scoring drives. So it was 17-17, as I mentioned, when this thing kicked over. And then Rutgers scored 17 consecutive points. It was 34-17. They were humming. They were making stops on Avery Johnson and the Kansas State offense on their defensive side. So it looked like maybe this one was possibly trending into a runaway for Rutgers, the way this thing was certainly looking. But 34-17, 7:38 in the third quarter. All the momentum at that point in the game was in favor of the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, and then it flipped. And it flipped big time in favor of the Kansas State Wildcats. Now, after those 6 consecutive scoring drives, here's what happened. 3 and out for Rutgers. Dylan Edwards goes 65 yards to the house for Kansas State. Antoine Raymond runs the ball for 6 yards, and then Ethan Kaliakmanis throws an interception, and that kind of started the big momentum shift, certainly towards the Purple Cats in that other direction. After these 6 scoring drives for Rutgers, here are the next 3 drives. 8 plays, negative 15 yards, and that aforementioned turnover by Ethan Kaliakmanis. Now, we talked about Dylan Edwards. He had that big touchdown run in the third quarter. He had that long touchdown run in the fourth quarter to eventually put Kansas State up for good. Wildcats come out on top of this one, 44-41. It seemed like whether it was Dylan Edwards or whoever it was, once they kind of got past that first and second level, once they were able to kind of get out in space into that back part of the Rutgers defense, it certainly seemed like the Wildcats were the more explosive team. It certainly seemed like they were the more athletic team once they got to that point. Now, Kansas State's offensive production shouldn't necessarily surprise anybody. Rutgers was returning a lot of people, but they also were kind of bit by the injury bug this season. This was not a great defensive team. They gave up a lot of production. They gave up a lot of yards in their Big Ten games, certainly this season as well. And Avery Johnson, he is certainly an exciting player to watch for Kansas State. When K-State got hot, right, and I mentioned kind of that series on Kansas State, right, they got some momentum and they started to put some success together and they got confidence that they could go down the field and score. Once that really started to happen, it felt like an avalanche. Right, you can see the avalanche in the distance. You can see the snow coming down. You can see it's coming towards you. And no matter how fast you run, in the other direction, you cannot outrun it. And that's exactly what happened with Kansas State in this game as well. This game, now I've watched Ethan Kaliakmanis play at Minnesota. I've watched him play at Rutgers, right, for a couple of years now, and it's really been the same. Since he first got onto the field, subbing for Tanner Morgan, right, when it was that whiteout game a couple of years ago at Penn State, and then you look from that point to this point in the Rate Bowl against Kansas State, it's roughly been the same quarterback. It's classic Ethan Kaliakmanis. He hasn't really changed a lot. I don't think he's really progressed a ton as a quarterback. There's been times, and this game, right, is a microcosm of maybe his whole career where things look really good and he's on target and he's putting together a couple of consecutive really good throws and he's in rhythm, and then there's just some head-scratching throws, some head-scratching inconsistencies with him as a quarterback. 14 of 32, 237, a touchdown, and an interception in this game. Now, it's unfortunate that Rutgers falls short of that 8-win mark this season. They went 7-6 last year. They end up with the same 7-6 record this season. But I think the future is still bright. Look, Greg Schiano has been recruiting really well at Rutgers. Right, you're looking at top 35, top 30 classes type of thing. And when you start stacking classes like that and you keep chopping, like they like to say at Rutgers, you're eventually going to see these young players step up and you're going to see them develop. Now, with Kyle Monangai not into this game, and we got to give a shout out to Kyle Monangai, one of the best players certainly in Rutgers history, an all Big Ten type of performer in consecutive seasons, another 1,200-yard season for Kyle Monangai. He opted out of this game, but he was still on the sideline with his teammates. And like us, he was able to watch maybe the future on display for this Rutgers Scarlet Knights program. Antoine Raymond rushed 18 times, 133 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Raymond also had a really good game earlier this season against Minnesota when the Scarlet Knights were able to get it done in that particular game. Ja'Shawn Benjamin, I think, is a really good player. A lot of people in Rutgers circles really like him, and I think those two are going to be a really good running back combination certainly next season and beyond. KJ Duff is a really big and a really athletic target. He had 3 catches for 58 yards in this game. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be tough to defend in the future for Big Ten defenses. So although Rutgers falls short in this bowl game against Kansas State, think how Rutgers started their Big Ten era with a coach like Kyle Flood, 2014, 15, 16, 17. Those years where they were at the absolute basement of the Big Ten. Now we're talking about back-to-back 7-6 seasons. Rutgers has established some winning consistency in Piscataway, New Jersey. Let's head on to the next bowl game, and let's talk about the Las Vegas Bowl, the USC Trojans and the Texas A&M Aggies. Here's how I see this one. Texas A&M really controlled the first 40 minutes of this game. Now, especially you look at that early on in the second half when they got ahead 24-7. Right? The USC offense was a little bit out of rhythm. Texas A&M was certainly taking advantage of things. I think Marcel Reed is a pretty darn good player back there for the Aggies as well. So we want to give props to him certainly. But once USC saw that opening, once Texas A&M gave them a little bit of an opening, that's when USC certainly flipped the script. There were a couple of pass interference drives on that second touchdown drive of the game. First touchdown drive of the second half for USC, they ended up scoring, and then after that, I think they just needed that little window. They needed that little opening to create some confidence, to create some momentum for the rest of the football game. You gotta love the way this game ended with Kyle Ford getting that touchdown catch. Of course, he started at USC, transferred across town to UCLA, comes back to USC in his last game as a Trojan, and makes that game-winning touchdown catch to give USC the 31 win over the Texas A&M Aggies in this game. All right, let's talk about the wide receiver position, because there's been a lot of talk in Southern California about Deuce Robinson leaving, I know he's not a wide receiver, but Quentin Joyner leaving, Zachariah Branch leaving, Kyron Hudson leaving. I know Kyron Hudson wasn't a part of that first great recruiting class for Lincoln Riley, but you saw a lot of those guys depart the program, and of course they weren't available during this football game. But maybe you saw the guys that were right in front of your face the whole time. You saw the guys that maybe should have been the guys all along. And that's Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon really step up. As this season went along, Makai Lemon, and you could tell, just got better and better and better and better. And he eventually developed into the top target for the Trojans. He was not the top target in this game. I thought maybe the most well-rounded in terms of talent wide receiver on this roster all year long was Jacoby Lane. And he certainly made a case for that. 7 catches, 127 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Lemon, 6 catches for 99 yards. It seemed like they were always coming up big down the stretch. So you have a guy in Jacoby Lane. I think he's got all of the talent. He's got the physical tools, I think, to be a number 1 type of wide receiver going forward for USC. And I certainly think that the Trojans can build off of this. I think they're going to need to backfill at the wide receiver position a little bit. Going to be very intrigued exactly to see how they do that. But I certainly think that they have a really good building block in that position going forward, and they performed really well at the wide receiver position in this Las Vegas Bowl, and certainly helped them vault them to that victory over the Aggies from College Station. Let's talk about the running back position. Now, before I get in and talk about Brian Jackson, Amarian Peterson was also in that running back room and did solid in this game. How about the offensive line, or maybe the offensive line that wasn't there? Remember, Jonah Monheim declared for the NFL draft. He was not available for this game. Mason Murphy entered the transfer portal, and Elijah Page was injured very early on in this game. So you're without 3 main guys up front on your offensive line. But I thought the USC O-line did a really good job responding. I thought they did a really good job up front against Texas A&M's defensive front, specifically in run blocking. And now that's where we get into maybe Lendale White 2.0. He wears the same number. Let's talk about the freshman, Brian Jackson. Now, his stat line isn't going to necessarily pop at you. 16 carries, 66 yards, and a touchdown. But, man, he is a big, physical back. Talked about comparing him to Lendale White at the beginning. Now, USC, of course, had 2 very good running backs. They had a 1,000-yard back in Woody Marks. They had a really good back, of course, in Quentin Joyner, who's now over at Texas Tech. But I think Brian Jackson needs to be a big part of the running back discussion, going forward. I think that we'll see what Eli Sanders is going to bring, and he's a transfer, I believe, from New Mexico that's going to come in for the 2025 season. But I just love the physicality and the effort and the toughness and the grit that Brian Jackson ran with this season. I don't think you saw a ton of that for USC. Now, I talked about Joyner and I talked about Marks, right? And those guys certainly were very good running backs, specifically Woody Marks. But on a 3rd and 2 and a 3rd and 3 where you need a guy to get tough yards, Brian Jackson, I think, is a guy that can certainly do that in the future. I'm excited to see a potential Thunder and Lightning combination in the backfield for USC next season. Okay, I want to finish on this. Jaden Mayava, he ain't it. He ain't it. We know what the expectations are for USC football. We know what the expectations are for the quarterback position for Lincoln Riley, of course. Now, before I move on and I kind of really explain this a little bit more, you got to give him credit, right? Maybe things weren't exactly working early on in this game, but he eventually battled back. He led his team back. He made key throws in key situations to lead his team down the field for scoring drives for USC to eventually be able to win this football game. 22 of 39, 295, 4 touchdowns, but those 3 interceptions. And it wasn't just this game that Jaden Mayava has shown inconsistencies. Check out that Notre Dame game when the Irish and the Trojans are going back and forth, late 3rd quarter, early 4th quarter, a couple of pick sixes late in the game cost USC a chance to maybe upset the Irish at the Coliseum. And I just watch him since he's taken over for Miller Moss, and he doesn't pop. He's not that Lincoln Riley next great quarterback. And I think that's what USC fans really want out of that position. When they hired Lincoln Riley, they expected to have great NFL type of talent at the quarterback position. And with all due respect to Jade Maava, I do not think he's that. If USC wants to compete at a playoff level, at a Big Ten championship contender-ish level, Jade Maava is not going to be able to be that guy to lead you to that point. I just don't think he's going to be as consistent as they want to be able to lead him to that promised land that Trojan fans certainly do desire. So what happens for next year? Husan Longstreet, the great true freshman, has certainly, received a lot of attention. We'll see if he's ready for that moment, or will USC possibly create a bridge with someone in the transfer portal in the next few weeks or months or whatever, or maybe it's someone going down the road in the spring. But man, they got to improve. They got the whole thing about a Lincoln Riley football team is you need that elite quarterback. If a Lincoln Riley team, and maybe this year is a great example, if a Lincoln Riley team does not have an elite quarterback, you're not going to have a good football team, more or less an elite level football team. USC, safe to say, the way this season started in Las Vegas against an SEC team, and then the way the season ended, winning a bowl game in Las Vegas against an SEC team. Those are certainly things that stand out this season, but look at what happened in between. Certainly a disappointing season for USC coming out of the optimism in early September after that win over the LSU Tigers, but capping it off with another bowl win is certainly something that they can build momentum on. Let's talk about the Pinstripe Bowl, the last of this bowl games. The Nebraska Cornhuskers finally back in a bowl game, this time against the Boston College Eagles at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. All right, we need to get this off of my chest right now. If you play a bowl game north of the Mason-Dixon line, it needs to be indoors. Bowl games should be a reward for all of these teams involved, right? You take a trip somewhere that you normally wouldn't take a trip during the season. You spend a week there. You take in the sights. You take in the sounds and all of that. I understand New York City. I understand the Yankees and Yankee Stadium. I get all of that. But the weather and the conditions for this bowl game is a reward for absolutely nobody. And then factor in, it's also a baseball stadium, and I feel very strongly that football games should not be played in baseball stadiums as well. So let's talk about the weather a little bit. This was a slopping mess, certainly between these teams, between the Huskers and the Eagles. Neither team was going to have their best offensive game. All right, let's just get that out of the way, certainly right out of the gate. Okay, whether it was Nebraska or whether it was Boston College, this was kind of be a mucky game. There were probably going to be some turnovers. There were going to be some mistakes. It was just about the team that was going to be able to overcome that and who was going to make the least mistakes, who was going to make the most, certainly, out of the situation. For Nebraska, Dylan Raiola was solid. He was efficient. It was a lot of like what we've seen so far this season with 15 in red and white, 23 of 31, 228 yards. He had that early interception, but he came back with a late touchdown as well. So just a solid performance on offense. I want to talk about Johnson and Johnson. Rahmir Johnson and Emmett Johnson. Let's start first with Rahmir. Pinstripe Bowl MVP. The way, just his entire 6-year journey has been a hell of a journey, certainly, for Rahmir Johnson. What a way to end it as the Pinstripe Bowl MVP and his performance. So, if you remember back to that 3-9 season, the greatest 3-9 team of all time, as many have joked around about, Rahmir Johnson was a big part of that team. He had a really good year, 495 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, 197 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns that season. He was a big part of that offense that particular season. The next year, Nebraska hired Mark Whipple, and he put Rahmir basically on the shelf for some reason. 2023, he was banged up, he was hurt, and that really kind of derailed, certainly, that season for Rahmir. This season, he got healthy, and he played a little bit of a bigger role than certainly the last 2 seasons. 261 rushing yards, 179 receiving yards as well. He had battled through injuries during his time, and I always thought when Ramir Johnson was healthy, he can be an explosive weapon in this Nebraska offense. Anytime I watch Nebraska football, I'm like, they need to get Ramir Johnson on the football field. I was always kind of thinking that into the back of my mind, specifically that 2022 season, right after his really good 2021. And now is where we get into kind of the emotional part of this. So it was revealed by Matt Rule in the post-game press conference that his mom was sick during this season. His mom eventually passed away in November of this season, but he wanted to stick with his guys. He wanted to stick with this team. This is a culture guy. This is a Nebraska Cornhusker through and through. And to have all of these trials and tribulations throughout, whether it was this year or whether it was his entire Nebraska career, for him to stick around in a day and age where you do not blame anybody in transferring in that particular situation early on in his Nebraska career. He stuck around, he loved this program, and he saw it through. And in his final game, 10 carries, 60 yards, and a touchdown, propelling Nebraska to a victory. You absolutely love to see it. And then you go to the flip side. Let's talk about Emmett Johnson. Of course, there's been some movement, certainly in the running back room for Nebraska as far as the transfer portal is concerned. Emmett Johnson was in the portal. He came out. Dante Dowdell has transferred out of this program. But, man, when I look at Emmett, I think he can be that number one option. I think he can be that bell cow for Nebraska, certainly going forward. He showed that spark, that explosiveness that we have seen in flashes over the last two seasons. I remember last year where he came out, I think it was maybe against Purdue, where he had a really big explosive run in that win over the Boilermakers. Like, he's shown it. He's shown it, and I know that's been pretty crowded back there in that running back room, but now as we look forward to next year, I think Emmett is going to be that number one guy. I think Emmett could be in store for a breakout year, maybe a 1,000-yard type of season, certainly next season. In this game, 14 carries and 68 yards on the ground. Would certainly expect him to see him evolve into the next stage of his career, as things keep on going down the road. This defense was bend but don't break personified. Boston College was able to move the ball a decent amount in this game, whether it was early in the game, middle of the game, late in the game. I know they got some extra points towards the end of this thing that made this thing seem closer, I think, than it really was. A 20-15 final score when all was said and done. But Nebraska did a really good job getting Boston College into third downs that were a little bit more difficult to convert, and then stopping them and halting them on fourth down. The Eagles 0-for-4 on fourth down. So they could get it, inside the 40, inside the 30, towards the red zone. And they mentioned it on the broadcast of this game. Boston College doesn't exactly kicking field goals, right? They were one of the teams in college football that kicked field goals the least this season. So Nebraska, their ability to hold up on fourth downs, bending but not breaking, was the key for them not allowing an offensive point for BC until very late in this football game as well. Like, you look at BC, you look at Grayson James, their quarterback, 26 of 41, 301 yards. So they were able to move the ball through the air pretty well against Nebraska. They didn't have much going on the ground, though. Just 47 rushing yards for Boston College in this game. And this was a great opportunity for younger players and an audition for them to see, hey, maybe I can make an impact in New York City to really give myself a good chance to maybe fight for a starting spot next season. It was also a little bit of an audition for now the new permanent defensive coordinator in John Butler to see kind of what he offered and what they were going to go throw out there defensively as well. You talk about some of these young players. Vincent Shavers, I thought, stood out, 4 tackles and a sack for him. Willis McGahee, the fourth, had 3 tackles. I think he had a batted ball in a key situation as well. You saw Cameron Lenhart show up a little bit as well. So with the transfer portal defections that we saw because of Tony White's departure over to Florida State, this was a great opportunity for some of those young guys to really step up. And I thought this unit did a really good job, certainly as a whole. It was fantastic to see Ty Robinson in this game. It was fantastic to see Nash Hutmaker in this game. Gonna miss watching those guys in Husker uniforms, let me say that. All right, let's end everything on this. Nebraska the way they started this season, 5-1, the road was certainly there for them to win 8 games. The road was certainly there for them to win 9 games. But folks, getting to a bowl game and then winning said bowl game is progress for Nebraska. Maybe this isn't quite the ultra quick turnaround that maybe Nebraska fans certainly wanted in year number 2. Matt Rule said coming into the season, he thought this team was further along in the rebuild than Temple was when he was there, than Baylor was when he was there. And I think that got Nebraska fans really excited about what the future could truly be in Lincoln, Nebraska. Remember, this is a team that started 5-1, as I said, but finished the regular season 1-5. I talk about progress, and I think it's just steps on the ladder. I think this is incremental progress for this Nebraska Cornhuskers football season. That's what this 2024 season was. All right? Things that have maybe been the bugaboo for Nebraska in the past, I think they were able to kind of get some of those monkeys off of their back. You talk about Colorado. They've been a little bit of a pain lately when these two teams have played. They were able to beat them and beat them convincingly. Wisconsin had beaten them a ton of times in a row, and they were also able to win that game convincingly. Getting those monkeys off of their back is certainly going to help the forward trajectory of this program going forward. And then, of course, this bowl game. Being able to kind of get that mental block out of their heads and then winning said bowl games is progress. And I think there's a lot of promise with this Nebraska team going forward. Look, this season, you know, whether it was me or a lot of other people saying, man, I think Dylan Raiola is going to have a really good year this year. He was a true freshman. There were going to be bumps in the road for the Nebraska Cornhuskers this season. And he looked really good at times, and then you saw some of those freshman learning moments for 15 in red and white. But when we talk about promise, they look like they could have a pretty good offense next year. I talk about Emmett Johnson possibly being a bell cow running back. You talk about Jamal Banks is coming back. Jalen Lloyd is coming back. Carter Nelson, Ja'Cory Barney, Thomas Fedoni. All of these guys could really form a really good offense, but I think the big thing is you have an offensive coordinator that is capable. I think we all saw maybe the train wreck that was Marcus Satterfield. It's a good thing that Dana Holgorsen is going to get an opportunity to build his version of Nebraska's offense going forward. You can't forget about the great transfer wide receiver in Dane Key as well. I think there's a great opportunity for Nebraska to be able to develop offensively over the season. We'll see what they look like on the defensive side of the ball, but maybe incremental steps, baby steps, building a program, building a culture, getting this bowl win in New York City in ultra sloppy conditions was the next step on that ladder, certainly for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. All right, bowl season is just getting started. Those are my thoughts on the Pinstripe Bowl, on the Rate Bowl, on the Las Vegas Bowl. Leave all of your thoughts, these games and more, in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.